Good morning, Western Tech. We will now be taking a pause in our classes to commemorate Remembrance Day. We currently find ourselves living through the uncertainty of a pandemic. Our testimonies will be of great value when this history is studied by future generations. However, on this day of remembrance, it is important to take the time to reflect on the experiences of individuals who have lived through their own unprecedented moments in history. Conflicts and struggles that have required courage and sacrifice, and that continue to have significant impacts on our society today. This morning we will pause and remember, lest we forget. World War I began with a tone of patriotism, with 424,000 Canadian soldiers courageously boarding ships overseas, many of them teenagers who left their schooling to do their part. This idealistic view would change quickly with the brutality of trench warfare. 61,000 Canadians would lose their lives, with another 172,000 injured by war's end. The following is an excerpt from a Canadian soldier's memories of enlisting and his growing understanding of the realities of war.
I bring out the old World War I photos. Seeing my buddies so grand in their uniforms, their eyes full of soldier pride. The men who never returned. No matter how many times I've looked at the pictures, my eyes still fill up with tears. Even though I marched home victorious, with my chest full of medals, it is a war I have never understood. How did we get pulled into battle that cost more than 14 million lives? It's been 20 years since Bill, Rob, and I left Mike and 60,000 other Canadians on those far-off European shores for a cause that was greater than their lives. We were mates. We lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, grew up, and became men together. We were looking for adventure, and we were filled with hunger. It made us easy marks for war, the recruiting posters that seduced us, and their promises of what heroes would be. Before we knew it, we were on our way to the European campaign. Registering for the army was easy, boot camp quick, and there we were on the beach at Dunkirk getting our pictures taken. I still can't figure it out, how one day you're working in a lumber camp, cutting down trees, and the next you're in a trench, cutting down people. When we arrived in Ypres, we had our first glimpse of war. The town was almost destroyed. There were gaping holes in what remained of the once large buildings. Ypres was the crossroads of our lives. 10 minutes after arrival, you could hear the heavy shells coming from a long way off, like an express train in the distance, bearing down on the spot where you were standing. 20 years later, I still sweat when I hear the train coming into the station. I'll never forget the sound of those shells. The memory is burned very deep.
Canadian women did essential work during the World Wars. On the home front, they worked in munitions factories, worked the land on farms away from their families, and served as test pilots. Others went overseas to serve as military nurses or nursing sisters to treat the wounded on both sides. The following is the testimony of Lieutenant Nursing Sisters Marjorie Whitney, Doreen Gary, and aircraft worker Mary McCall and their experiences in World War I.
When I heard about the war and they were going to send a unit from Vancouver, British Columbia unit, I put my name down. And we were trained as officers, lieutenant nursing sisters. We did a lot of drilling and marching just to get us straight and know how to step out. I think we had 3 weeks training in Victoria, or just outside Victoria. There was a camp there. And we trained like the men did. And that's when the marching came in, the picture I showed you.
I knew that the war was coming to an end, but I remember quite a few of us going behind a door and crying and having a good cry, because of course I'd lost my brother, and a lot of the other girls had to, and I think we were just so tired that I don't think we could have kept on going much longer, because we were very young, and we've been through some pretty terrific times, and I think it was from a relief that we cried so much.
Yeah, I got married 1920. Married my husband, he came back. He was a veteran, but served through the Vimy Ridge campaign, and he was only a teenager. He was 20 when he came back. I was 18. Got married. We were blessed with nearly 70 years of marriage. It was our 70th year when he passed away. We had a son and a daughter, and our son took off, went to the Second World War. We lost him. He crashed into the Pacific Ocean. That's what the Canadian government gives you for your son. Only son.
What is it?
Silver Cross. When I die, that goes with me. It's a ruling. Well, you know what? I think that all that give their lives give it in vain. It hasn't made the world a better place. I don't think. I've never seen a headline that was anything worthwhile that the 2 wars helped. You know? It was terrible.
In addition to honoring the bravery of Canadians who risked their lives to serve, it is important to remember that the trauma of war is not confined to the battleground. Many in Canada were subject to discriminatory and xenophobic government policies in both world wars. One such group was the Japanese Canadian community in World War II. The following is the testimony of Fred Sasaki. He recounts the story of the night that his father was taken by Canadian government officials.
The night of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, we were having supper, and there was a knock on the door, and I went to answer it, and much to my surprise, there were 3 tall RCMP officers at the door, and they asked if Shuichi Sasaki lived here. I said yes. They came in, and they went through every room in our house and every dresser, and I after they went, I remember that all my father's personal papers were gone, insurance policies, birth certificates, passports. They took it all away, and that very night they took my father away. For about 2 weeks we didn't know where he was, and finally they told us he was in the immigration detention place down by the waterfront of Vancouver. And they were there, my father was kept there. There were about 40 Japanese rounded up that night, I heard, and they were there for about a month, and then they were, my father and the 40 people that were interned were sent to CB prisoner of war camp in Alberta, in northern Alberta.
Another facet of Remembrance is to commemorate not only the sacrifice of soldiers in combat, but the courage of veterans who served our country in spite of systemic discrimination. Black men who attempted to serve in World War I were often not welcomed, rejected at recruiting stations, amidst protests by white volunteers who did not wish to serve alongside them. Only 16 black volunteers were accepted and permitted to integrate into Canadian battalions before 1916. Nova Scotia-born Jeremiah Jones was one of those recruits. Jones was 58 years old, 13 years past the age limit of recruitment, but presented papers stating that he was 39 in order to be successfully recruited. He fought with distinction at the battles of Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele and was recommended for the Distinguished Conduct Medal. Unfortunately, Jones would not receive it in his lifetime, and his contributions went unrecognized. Thanks to continued efforts by Jones's family, he was posthumously awarded the medal in 2010, 60 years after his death.
Many students who went to Western Tech enlisted between 1939 and 1945. A memorial on the second floor stands in their honor. There, you can see their school photos before they left for war, alongside the poignant phrase, "So they passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for them on the other side." The following are just a few of the names on the memorial. young men who lost their lives never to return home. Private Fred H. Luke, Private Harold McCluskey, Flight Sergeant Alfred Connor, Sergeant Lloyd McDowell, Sergeant John A. Donald Moffett, Private Joseph W. Roper, Sergeant Harold William Frost, Flight Sergeant Earl A. H. Sills, Private Edward J. Hoy, Sergeant Claire Courtney. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn them. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will now close our ceremony with the playing of the last post, followed by 2 minutes of silence at the 11th hour. We remember.
Thank you for your attention. The ceremony has now concluded.